The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. It's Down to Business with Jack Miller. Forget what they teach you in school. This is real life. Not Wall Street, but Main Street. He and his guests will answer your questions and provide you with valuable information. Stay tuned and join in the conversation. Follow them on Facebook at Jack Miller Down to Business or on Twitter at H.Jack Miller 1.
When the earth was created.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Jack Miller with my main man, Todd Cohen. Super excited to be with you today. We're very lucky today to have the Deputy Consul General for Israel, for Miami, and a bunch of other states with us. I'm sorry if you hear some background noise. I got all kinds of things going on here. Then after that, we have Donald Stinson, author of Downstairs at the White House. Todd, how was your week?
Great week, Jack. How about you?
My week was excellent, thank you.
Great.
Very good.
Great.
I joke around. I say my wife didn't lock me out, and I'm not in diapers yet. I have a good week.
Yeah, you're getting ready for that Depends, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. At my age, it comes on quicker. I don't know. My phone's going off. All kinds of background noise here. I'm ready to.
I don't know how I make it through the
But
day
anyway,
anymore.
let's bring on the Deputy General of the State of Israel for the state of Miami. Deputy General, are you with us?
Hey, Jack, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. I really appreciate you taking your time. I can only imagine how busy you are. I want to focus on all the positive things going in Israel because I call it as the Israeli miracle, the economic resurgence, the political resurgence, just the boom all over. But I can't help but start with the what I call the Gaza attacks. It seems like every day the I guess it's Hamas or some proxy of Iran are lobbying missiles in Israel, and it also feels like every week these terrorists are storming the Israeli borders. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, just to frankly get it out of my system.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, it's been a few tough weeks for us. I actually was looking at stats in the past couple of days. There's over we're facing now a new form of terrorism, which is kite terrorism. We have the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip sending out kites. This is a new thing. Over the past couple of months, they've sent over 800 kites, and they attach Molotov cocktails to them. They've managed to burn more than 6,000 acres on the Israeli side, farming land and forest, which has just been, on fire. And this is following what we see, what they call as protests, what we see as new aggression coming out of the Gaza Strip. Now, unfortunately, Israel hasn't been in Gaza for over 10 years now. Basically, in 2007, we pulled out of the Gaza Strip, dismantled all our settlements, took out all our soldiers back to the last inch. And all we've been getting back from the Palestinians, from the Hamas terrorists, is rockets, mortar shells, bombs. And in the past few weeks, we see that they have been engaging in a new tactic. They push their own civilians up to the border, up to the fence, use women and children, and try to infiltrate the border. They put bombs on the border. They use the fire kites. They try to infiltrate, all in order to kill Israelis, all in order to abduct Israeli soldiers. And what we find ourselves again needing to defend ourselves and make sure that our border is secure, so our kids are not slaughtered.
Right.
It seems to me that the Palestinians have a problem of leadership, that the Israelis have thrived and been successful because they've always been blessed with good leaders who've had the people's heart and a love for the people. And the Palestinian leaders seem to want to line their own pocketbooks. Instead of caring for their people, have taught hate and terror. And it seems the only solution is new leadership. In fact, I thought Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think it was last week, he put out a message to the Iranian people. Apparently Iranian is, I'll use the word water deprived. I forget the number, 60 or 70% of the people don't have water. And the Israeli government is going to, I believe, put up a website in Farsi for the Iranian people, learn the fantastic, I think it's the best technology in the world to preserve water and drip irrigation. But I see with the Palestinians the same thing. It's the lack of leadership. Their leaders don't care about their people. They'd rather see them dead than prosper.
Yeah, what we see in the Gaza Strip is basically what we call a double war crime. We see the Hamas terrorists hiding behind their civilians in order to put them in harm's way and themselves not. And they're shooting indiscriminately into our civilian population. It's an unfortunate situation. We're peace-loving people. And by the way, we think that also the Palestinians on the other side, the ordinary citizens, what they want is peace and security, good jobs and prosperity for themselves and for their children. They want a good future. But regretfully, in 2007, they've been hijacked by a terrorist organization. Hamas is a terrorist organization recognized as such in the United States, in the European Union. This is what we've been dealing with. There's no reason, to go into the logic of Hamas, because their ideology is a deadly ideology. They seek not to do peace with Israel, not to negotiate with us, but to replace Israel. Their wish is to drive us out of the Holy Land. They want to be instead of Israel and not live alongside Israel. I can only join you in hope that the Palestinians will have new relevant leadership that will love their children more than they hate Israelis. And the second topic that you spoke about, water. I think water is a tool that can also promote peace. You probably know, and you've been to Israel, that Israel is over 70% desert. Most of Israel's land is arid or semi-arid, but we've managed to solve our water problems. If 10, 12, 15 years ago, we were talking about importing of water to Israel because we had water shortage, then we solved that. In the past 3-4 years, we've basically solved our shortage of water, and we are net exporters of water. We have technology. Over 50% of Israel's potable water today is water that comes from the Mediterranean Ocean, salt water that is desalinated by Israeli technology. We saved our water shortage, and we want to share the water. We want to share this technology with our neighbors because we think that this can promote peace. You brought up the Iranians. We have no quarrel with the Iranian people. We have no problems with the Iranian people. If we can reach out people to people, if we can provide the technologies that we have that relate to water, that can solve their acute problems, and my prime minister said that very clear, we're willing to do that. We want to help the Iranian people also in their time of need.
I want to jump topic to some great things that are happening in Israel. First, I have to, bring up, I don't know if the world knows, but Israel, I believe it was in Tel Aviv, had the largest, I don't want to say gay or LGBTQ, gay pride parade or event over the weekend, I think, ever in the Middle East. I saw the pictures. I know some people who were there. It felt like 100,000 people. I don't know, tons of people. But Israel, I believe, is the only open society in the Middle East.
That's true. By the way, in the parade last week, there were over 200,000 people marching, partying. we have parades like this in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and in other cities in Israel. Israel is the only real democracy in the Middle East. You got to say it and say it again and say it out loud. Israel is an island. Israel is a democracy. It promotes the values, the shared values that we share with America, of happiness, of liberty, of freedom. And there's no better way to show freedom than you show the rights and how people can march and can express their love in the way that they want. Gay Pride is an excellent example, one of the biggest parties in the world. We were very happy to see it. We have an influx of tourists that are coming every year to see this huge parade, this huge happiness, and we are very proud of that.
Well, we're all proud of it.
You should be.
Yesterday was a monumentous day. The U.S. pulled out of the UN, I think they call it the Human Rights Commission or something. Council. I wanted to get your take on that because it seems to me, and I think it's a fact, that while there's been, as an example, I think 500,000 Syrians who've been murdered, butchered, every week the UN comes out with another resolution against Israel. It seems it's so biased, it lost any sense of credibility. And I, for one, am very proud that the U.S. pulled out yesterday. And I wanted to just get your take on it.
So first of all, we applaud the administration in Washington, President Trump, Secretary of State Pompeo, of course, the magnificent Ambassador Nikki Haley, for their wonderful work and the wonderful shift towards securing Israel and defending Israel on the international arena. And you brought up the Human Rights Council. Just to understand the bias against Israel in this council, which is, in fact, turned this council into a joke. This council, over the years, has passed more resolutions against Israel than any other country combined. You take all the resolutions passed against other countries together, they don't reach the number of resolutions against Israel. This council has an item every year that it addresses only regarding Israel, a separate item regarding Israel. And we believe that we came to a conclusion, and so did our friends here in America, that being on this council is pretty much useless. And the United States decided to withdraw. By the way, if you're looking for some beacons of human rights who serve, and you can understand how this council is made up of, it has countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Qatar, and the list goes on. Countries that their record for human rights is not just appalling, but it turns this council into a joke. So we think it was a right move, and we very much appreciate the move by the United States. And we'll see how where it goes from here.
Speaking of the UN, I'm certainly no fan, but Prime Minister Netanyahu, first of all, always delivers a great speech before the UN. But I think it was last year or the year before, he stood before the General Assembly and told the world that the countries are going to start making peace with Israel. And it seems to me, since he made that statement, either Israel has been a revolving door for foreign ministers, or Prime Minister Netanyahu has been visiting all countries. And it seems there's more and more commerce. I want to talk about U.S.-Israeli commerce, but it seems throughout the world there's more and more commerce and cooperation, whether it's overt or subvert. But it seems a lot of the moderate Arab states are sort of cooling the rhetoric and warming up to Israel, as well as some of the Asian countries, the African countries, just across the world. You see this. And I wanted to get your feeling on this.
So, yeah, you're right. When you hear about Israel being isolated, look at the countries that our prime minister visited. Just this past year, our prime minister was the first prime minister of Israel in 7 decades. to visit Latin America. He had a visit to Argentina, to Colombia, and to Mexico. This was the first prime minister to actually visit any country in Latin America south of the United States. He had visits to Japan, China, Russia, the United States, obviously a few times. He's been to Australia, to Africa. So isolation, we can move past that. Yeah, we are enjoying a very high rate of growth in Israel. We see our GDP per capita growing and growing year after year. This year we are passing Japan, and the possibility still to be determined, but in the next couple of years we expect to pass Great Britain and France in terms of GDP per capita. This is huge. Israel is becoming the next big thing in tech, in high tech, in cyber, in homeland security. We have a lot to offer to the world, and the world sees this. And following your question about our neighbors, yes, also our neighbors see this. We have solutions, homeland security, agriculture, water solutions. We have technology that is becoming relevant. So if in the past our neighbors would, look at the downside of being friends with Israel, today they see an upside. We share an enemy, which is Iran, and we have to defend ourselves, perhaps together or coordinated, to tackle this threat coming out of Iran. But definitely there is also an economic upside for cooperation between Israel and its neighbors, those that we do have formal relationships with, those who we don't. And it's our job, slowly but surely, to surface these relationships and show that there is an upside, there is a benefit for doing business with Israel. And we think that they know this already.
Right. Now, the BDS, the boycott effort that some people sort of try and get out there in the world, sort of anti-Semitic, and, that's been batted around on college campuses. But, for all the talk of BDS, it seems the Israeli economy is booming. And, that was just covered. But is there any industry or companies that are, in fact, affected by the BDS effort? And is that publicized, or is that kept close to the vest to sort of not let the people who orchestrate that know that they're getting anything accomplished?
So let's start with the good news. BDS has not really scratched the surface when it comes to affecting the Israeli economy. Now, let's take a step back. What is BDS? BDS is a movement that on its title was supposed to bring Israel down to its knees in order to gain concessions within the peace process with the Palestinians. In fact, BDS is a movement that is first and foremost an anti-Semitic movement.
Sure.
It's an anti-Semitic movement, and I'll give you a thumb rule, how you check anti-Semitism. You look if any other country in the world is held to the same standards as the State of Israel. And if you have, if your answer is no, then you know why Israel is targeted with a different set of standards. Now, the BDS movement is not just in order to gain concessions in the peace process, but it is also intended to change or hurt the foundations of the State of Israel. The State of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. It's the nation state of the Jewish people. BDS aims to change that. BDS is against the Jews from having their own country, their own nation state, and that is their true move. They basically want Israel not to exist as a Jewish state. Now, going back to the good news, they have not scratched the surface. They've been active practically for the past 15 years with no real success. We hope things will continue this way. There's a lot of work to be done, whether if it's on campuses, whether if it's with companies or governments or legislation. I'm happy that Florida was one of the first states in the Union. There's already more than 20 states that passed anti-BDS legislation. This means that if you are a supporter of BDS, if you boycott Israel, then the state of Florida does not want to do business with you. We are proud that the state of Florida stands with Israel, and we hope that even more states will follow.
Well, Deputy Consul General, I can't thank you enough for being with us tonight, and personally for all the work you do, for all the work the Israeli government does, for every single member of the IDF, all the lone soldiers, all the supporters of Israel. I can go on forever and ever. I love you. I thank you. I can't thank you enough. From the bottom of my heart, just you're the best. Israel's the best. Everyone go visit Israel.
Yeah.
Do business with them. It's a happening society.
Not just go and visit Israel, but continue to support Israel. Israel is not just an American interest. Israel has turned into an American value. It's the most trusted ally and friend that the United States of America has on this earth. Israel has no better friend than America, and America has no better friend than the state of Israel. Israelis are with Americans, and Americans are with Israelis. We have to continue this, right and left, Republicans and Democrats. We keep Israel as a consensus in America, and we are very happy and fortunate to have friends like America. And yes, come and visit Israel. There's nothing like seeing Israel with your own eyes. We'll have you gladly, and we'll show you some Israeli hospitality.
Deputy Consul General, thank you. As they say, Hazak, Hazak, may we go from strength to strength. And hopefully you'll be back with us soon to talk about some good stuff. And thank you very much for your time. Everyone else will be back in 2 minutes. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Turn it around, turn it around, turn it around. You got to turn.
Does your company need financing to help with cash flow or make a purchase? Geltz Financial Corporation has been in business since 1989 and knows the financing that businesses need to succeed in today's competitive environment. Gelt offers a wide array of programs such as accounts receivable, factoring, asset-based lines of credit, commercial real estate purchase and refinance financing, and bridge loans. If your business needs financing, call us right now at 561-221-0900 to learn if you qualify. Gelt Financial understands that every business is in a unique situation, which requires a unique solution. We pride ourselves on thinking outside the box to secure even the most difficult financing. Call us right now at 561-221-0900 or visit us at geltfinancial.com. That's G-E-L-T Financial.com.
That's it. Turn it around.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm super excited. Todd, great interview. We have a fantastic guest.
I'm still cavelling. You broke out the Hebrew on air and everything. I mean, come on,
I know,
Jack.
I know. What can I tell you? But we got a great guest on. We have the author of Downstairs at the White House. This is a great book, by the way. I don't know how much it was on Amazon, but it's definitely worth the read. We're going to bring this guy on in a minute. His name's Don Stinson. He's a newspaper guy. Somehow, he'll tell us in a minute, he got a job, I think he was like 17 or something like that, at the White House. And could you imagine a 17-year-old with all the testosterone and craziness at the White House? And it happened to be, I think, toward the tail end of the Nixon administration. This guy worked right outside the Oval Office. Sinatra was involved, Spiro Agnew, Pat Nixon, not Nancy Reagan. This guy knows everyone. So let's bring him on. A lot of funny stuff. Don, are you with us?
I am. Hello.
Hi, Don.
I appreciate your time. I like the promotion behind you. That's good. I wonder why more of our guests don't think of that, by the way. I always think that. So I like you. I know you're a marketing and newspaper guy, and it shows it.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. I've watched a number of the episodes, and they are funny and interesting. So thanks for
Thank you.
having me on.
I'm very excited about this because I find the book humorous. I laughed. It was just funny. Maybe you give the audience sort of the background on how you found yourself working at the Oval Office during the Nixon administration, during not only the Nixon administration, during Watergate.
Right. I mean, no joke. This man is literally a real Forrest Gump. I mean, that's what it is.
I don't know, but he really is one of the few people who've had a front seat at history in the making, like no one else has had, or very
Amazing.
few people have had.
Well, it was fascinating. It was an accident. I went to, in my junior year of high school, there was a program that was available to enter college after your junior year of high school, and somehow I stumbled into that and ended up at American University, and then stumbled into a job because of somebody I met one day. I'd been looking for a job. I needed to, I had a lot of bills to pay back in those days, and I was looking for a job, and everybody in the world had turned me down. Finally, I meet one guy in the dorm one day who happened to have a job working in this funny place I'd never heard of called the Old Executive Office Building. And he said that he wasn't interested in the job any longer. It wasn't his major, and maybe I'd be interested. Well, I had no idea what it was. And the sad story is that it was a couple of days before I actually realized that I worked inside the White House complex.
So is that what happens? You can't get a job, so you get a job at the White House? Is that kind of like...
that is the Forrest Gump lifestyle.
Yeah, that's like an analogy on the Times.
There you are.
So I first worked for an assistant to the president named Peter Flanagan, who was a wonderful man, who actually, interestingly enough, was a descendant of the Bush family of Anheuser-Busch. And he also was behind America's development of the space shuttle. He was a brilliant fellow, and he was an assistant to the president for international economic affairs. I had no idea what that was, but I did have a job as a messenger and a clerk. And for those who might be old enough to remember this, I really rose in the ranks, and I became what was known as a key operator. And that meant you knew how to fix the Xerox machine back in those days that were about the size of battleships.
So as a messenger, what did you have to do? Like take stuff back and forth from the White House? I think I read that you had to deliver stuff to, I think it was the Senate Republicans every day or something like that.
Yeah, actually, well, I had that job, and then I went on to work for Vice President Agnew, and then in the White House proper. But at that time, and I started there in February of 1973. Oddly enough, also I had a top secret security clearance before I was old enough to vote. There was a lady who would come and visit me every day during the Senate Watergate committee meetings. It could have all been just a coincidence, but she would hand me a package that was just an envelope that did not say the White House on it. It was just a plain vanilla envelope, and I was to deliver it to Capitol Hill, usually to the office of a Republican member of the Senate Watergate Committee. And I did that sometimes several times a day. That had its dividends for a lot of different reasons, but also because I was a kid and because I did the same kind of things that people that age do when you don't have a fully formed frontal lobe yet. I did things like sneak on the senator's only elevator in the Capitol. That I got busted one day by Barry Goldwater and Hugh Scott. Goldwater, I'm sure everybody knows, he was
Hugh Scott was, I think, the senator of Pennsylvania.
And and Hugh Scott, who was the minority leader of the Senate, they busted me. But I got to know them as a result, so that was fun, and they were very kind to me over time. But in any event, I would take those things up there during the Watergate hearings. Then one day in somewhere late in the summer of 1973, I was walking down the hall in the old executive office building, which is a fantastic building. Most visitors to Washington don't know anything about it, but it used to be the old State, Navy, and War building. And as a matter of fact, right in one of the offices where one of my friends on this assistant to the president's staff worked was the same spot where Japanese emissaries had come on December 7th, 1941, to tell the Secretary of State that they were hoping for peace at the same time they were dropping bombs on Pearl Harbor. It's a building that's steeped with incredible history. But one day I was walking down the hallway and I wasn't paying attention, which was something that I often found myself doing. And I bumped into a guy, literally, who had I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember, but percolators. And he carried the big coffee thing and fill it up with water and such. And he had that. I ran right into him and knocked him over on the floor, got him wet and everything else. He turned out to be one of Spiro Agnew's speechwriters. And we got to be friends. And eventually I ended up with a job then upstairs in the EOB answering vice president's mail. And what I can tell you is that it is amazing what people will write to our national leaders, even to the vice president. We had a lady who she claimed that she and her family had been, as she said, cranially wired by the Martians. She sent a package to the vice president that included several tinfoil hats to be able to wear to shield ourselves from that. We had any number of different kinds of weird stuff. And of course, because I was the kid, I got most all of it. And but that, again, was another thing that led to something that was interesting that and I've talked about all of these things in the book. But I one day opened, my boss left a garbage bag for me, literally, that had been sent through the mail. I didn't even know you could do that, but it had stamps all over it, and it was stapled and all this kind of thing. And she left it to me because it was special. And I opened it up and looked inside, and the first thing that I saw were these little pictures that had been cut out. They were little pornographic pictures and a pair of broken electric scissors. But what was really disturbing about it was that there were some rags in there that had a substance on it that looked like dried blood. So I took this down to the Vice Presidential Protective Division of the Secret Service, very delicately, take that down to them. To them, it wasn't, apparently it was not all that special. So you can imagine how weird things were even in those days. They certainly looked at it, but they weren't shocked by it. But while I was down there, I was getting a cup of coffee or looking for a donut, probably scrounging for food. And one of the Secret Service agents I was friendly with said to me, "Don, I'd like you to meet Mr. Hill." And and I turned, and I didn't know who this guy was, and I shook his hand. And my friend said to me, "Hey, dummy, don't you know who that is?" No. He said, "That's Clint Hill." Now, for those who know about the Kennedy assassination, Special Agent Clint Hill of the Secret Service was assigned to Jacqueline Kennedy that day in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. He jumped off a moving vehicle, a follow-up car, and threw himself on top of President and Mrs. Kennedy as the car sped to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. He was the first real American hero I ever met. And he was, I don't think anybody I've ever met out-heroed Clint Hill on that day. But I went through a number of these kinds of circumstances where things just kind of happened. And in fact, to kind of close that story, I ended up in the West Wing the next week and delivered something. And as I was coming, I went to the elevator, and of all people to get on the elevator was John Connally, who had been the governor of Texas. He was the former Secretary of the Treasury at that time, but he had been the governor of Texas, and obviously he had been in the car in Dallas on that day. His wounds were the subject of the Warren Commission's magic bullet, or the magic bullet theory. But I met and had a nice conversation with him. But as these things were going on, I started to realize that I was not just meeting interesting people, but I was meeting people who were in the history books. And so I ended up knowing, because I got to know Connolly better later on, two people who were in that car that day.
Which was
was
unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
How was, out of curiosity, Vice President Agnew? Was he a nice guy to you, or how did they treat you when you're a kid at the White House? They ignore you, or was he talking?
Well,
to you?
I'm sorry if I end up talking. I'm having some trouble hearing you, but so forgive me in advance if I get a question wrong.
That's all right.
First of all, I was the one everybody knew but didn't know who he was. I was just this. I was completely out of sync. I was the only one walking around, I think, with acne, and but people were very nice. In fact, I was kind of like the pet rock around there. People were both fatherly, brotherly, motherly, and sisterly to me most of the time. Vice President Agnew was a very nice gentleman. He was certainly very nice to me. And, particularly at that age, you're particularly sensitive to those things, being around adults, and then not only being around adults, but the guy who was a heartbeat away from the presidency. But he very frequently used to ask me, how I was doing in college and those kinds of things. And I got to know one of his daughters rather well, who helped us answer mail towards the end of his administration.
And any concern about getting to know the vice president's daughter real well? I don't know. My juvenile mind would think
No, that's the right place to go.
I knew her as a lovely friend.
I understand. I get it. I get it.
Have you ever met or heard of anyone else named Spiro since that time in the White House?
Yeah, I actually did.
There you go.
And there was a restaurant in Annapolis, Maryland. It might still be there that was called Spiro.
Wow.
There's two Spiros out there. Pat Nixon.
Yes.
I think you have some stories about her. I think she yelled at you and then saved you at one point or something like that.
Oh, yeah, she saved me. Well, first of all, Mrs. Nixon was she was a charming, lovely woman. And she's been painted in various ways by the media over the years as perhaps not that, but I can attest to the fact that she was just wonderful. What happened was one day, now after I had lost my job with Vice President Agnew when he resigned and had gone over to Health, Education, and Welfare Department to work, where, by the way, I had to quit in order to get paid. That's a story that anybody who has experience with the government would read in the book and I think relate to. But I ended up as a messenger in the East Wing. So I had the full run of the White House, at least on the main floor, which is the ground floor where tourists go. I could go up to the staterooms on occasion if I really wanted to, and really all the way from the East Wing to the West Wing, the Oval Office, and such. So one day I was walking east, back towards my little cubbyhole office. I had the basement, maybe sub-basement would be better to say, of the East Wing. And there was, as I passed through the residence, there was somebody standing with a scarf on back in the shadows near the family elevator. It goes directly to the family up floor. And so I said, or as I went by, this voice yelled out, "Hey, kiddo, how you doing?" And so I looked back and I said, "Hey, kiddo, how you doing?" Because I assumed that it was one of the maids. Well, it wasn't. And somebody caught up to me later on to explain to me that was Mrs. Nixon I said that to. And they were not happy. How dare you, they said, call the First Lady by anything other than Mrs. Nixon. And I said, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. Well, I thought I was going to get fired. And a couple of weeks later, I was just trying to mind my own business and for once maintain a low profile, which didn't happen a lot because of all the things that I stumbled into. But the phone rang one day, and my boss handed it to me and said, "Someone wants to speak to you." And I took the phone, and it was Mrs. Nixon calling to tell me that not only was I not in trouble, but that I could call her kiddo anytime that I wanted. And we went on and had a lovely conversation about my parents and her life and other kinds of things. She was just she was lovely, charming.
That's great.
When you were there, I guess Watergate and the turmoil was at its maximum. Was it like a really tense environment? It sounds like Mrs. Nixon was sort of joking around and there was a lot of funny stories, but I'm picturing it from the outside as just as tense as you can get.
Well, and you would be right. It was, you could have cut the tension with a knife. There were people who were not only, a lot of these folks had given their lives to Richard Nixon, their professional lives. And now to come down to the end as things grew worse and worse by the hour, there were a lot of tears. There were a lot of people who were, all of the different emotions that people go through in grief, the stages of emotion. And they were something that I certainly found, particularly at that age, something very interesting to watch. There were people who absolutely denied that any of it was going on. I remember one woman who used to always hold on to a cross as she walked around. She was very religious. And one day, somebody asked me, since I had already been through a resignation as if now I was an authority, what happened when when your boss resigned from high office? And I just said, well, I left my job, and the woman grabbed on to the cross. I think she went and got one that was 2 or 3 times bigger after that. I think she thought that I was the devil incarnate just being around there. That was bad luck. But it was nerve-wracking. I mean, not for me. I watched all of this. I watched as I would go to the West Wing. I'd watch the people who would go in and out of the Oval Office. I used to try to hang out whenever I could with Rosemary Woods, who was the president's secretary. I did not have anything to do with the 18.5-minute gap. But it was interesting to watch the tension, and it did indeed get worse every day as things progressed. After the time that the president had to turn over the tapes and the smoking gun tape.
When did you decide that you were going to write a book about all of this? And I mean, was that marinating over the years, or is that something you always wanted to do or thought you would do?
Well, I started on it a couple of years ago, but what I had done was I was actually bright enough, which was odd, to have kept some notes about some of the things that went on, about personalities, about certain events, what events looked like. And so I had that to be able to go back on, and then I had to go and do a lot of research to be able to check my memory on events. But it took quite a while to write, but it was nothing that I really planned to do, but I ended up with the time available to be able to do it.
Right.
I heard a rumor that you dumped something on Frank Sinatra. Fact or fiction? No, actually, I read it in the book. I read it in the book. It really wasn't a rumor.
Yes, that's in the book. I one of the things that the Nixons insisted on was that the White House staff be treated to as many nice things as possible. The Fords did too, afterward, the time that I was there. And one of the things that we would be allowed to do is to come over and listen to dress rehearsals. And one of these dress rehearsals was for a state dinner for the president of Italy, who also, I mentioned in the book, I got in a struggle with over getting into a men's room while he was there visiting. It was not one of my grander moments. But we were able to go over, and Frank Sinatra was the one who was doing the rehearsal. And I happened to end up, again, it's kind of a Forrest Gump moment, I end up close to the front. And when it's over with, and I have to say, if you have never heard a recording of Sinatra singing Old Man River, I would greatly recommend it. Sitting there, I don't know how, maybe I was 15 or 20 feet away from him at that. Literally, the floor in the East Room vibrated from his voice. I've never heard anything that ever like it again. And so when he was done, he asked for one of his guys and his entourage for a glass of water. And I was younger and faster in those days. And I ran over and I grabbed the water. And he was sitting on a bench at the piano. And I proceeded to pour him a glass of water and proceeded at the same time to pour it all over his sock. And he was actually very nice about it. I mean, I was very nervous. My dad, I have to say that my dad gave me a philosophy, which was to always remember that they can't eat you. In other words, you might make people unhappy and they might fire you. But in the end, you try things, do things, because they can't eat you. So that was kind of my motto, and that led me to sit there with Sinatra. Well, instead of getting mad at me, we ended up chatting while he was taking off the sock. And I told him how cool his daughter Nancy Sinatra was. Some of us folks would remember her big hit, "These boots are made for walking."
That's
Of course.
Exactly. And so we had this nice chat, and then he says to me, he goes, he ruffles my hair, and he goes, "Hey, kid, you know what? I like you." He goes, "You come out and see me in Vegas sometime." Well, I believed him. So I went out and I looked up airfares, I called around and all that to find out that my chances of ever going to hang out with the Rat Pack were between 0 and none.
So how were Frank Sinatra's
Nice invitation.
Were his feet manicured and well groomed? Because you're probably one of the few guys who saw his toes up close. I'm going to ever talk to him.
I can't even discuss that.
Fair enough. Contractually, right.
I'm teasing you. You know what's interesting? You said that the Nixons and the Ford ones went out of their way to treat the White House staff, I think you used the word nicely, and expose them to as many good things as possible. I guess before you said that, I didn't even think of that. It seems that their reputation as being a little, or at least Nixon's, stodgy and not generous and things like that. But I may be wrong with that. I'm curious to see your take on the Nixons and the Fords as people.
Well, I think you have a sense, and there's a lot more that I wrote in the book about Mrs. Nixon, and you get a sense for her sense of humor, and she had a very generous, very kind spirit. I'll tell you about an incident that I had with President Nixon that made me, before I had it, I might have thought differently of him until this occurred. And what I used to do is I would go in the mornings. I worked full-time and I went to school full-time. And I would go in the mornings through the West Wing so that I could, up the driveway that you see on television. And I would go into the West Wing and I would walk through the Rose Garden because sometimes if I timed it just right, I could pass President Nixon in the morning as he went to the Oval Office, and I could say, "Good morning, Mr. President," which would certainly make my day.
Make everyone's.
And just as an aside on that, and you see a number of these things, I used to walk in every day with a briefcase that was filled with school papers and other things that no one ever checked. It was a different world back then.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure. When you were describing the mail, I was thinking that. No way.
Yeah, no envelopes of anthrax back then, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Wow.
It was definitely a different world. But so this one morning, I didn't have a briefcase. I had a book, and the book was about Theodore Roosevelt, and it said something like that on the cover. And as the president approached, he said, "Hey, what are you reading?" And I said, Mr. President, this is a book about Theodore Roosevelt. And he started into a soliloquy. I I would like to think that it was actually a conversation, but it was more, I think I was the only thing around that had a pulse, and he wanted to talk to somebody. But he spoke for, I don't even know how many minutes, but he talked about Theodore Roosevelt, and then he ended up speaking about Winston Churchill. And I relate that in the book, and it was an incredible conversation. He was not, by any extreme, the cardboard character that people have made him out to be. He could not have been more friendly. At the same time, I have to say, and I've been fortunate to meet a number of presidents over the years, that I have never felt in any human being the kind of electricity, the voltage that Richard Nixon gave off. And he was absolutely brilliant. Despite Watergate, all of those things, he was an absolutely brilliant man. And but he was very kind in his conversation with me. And he also pointed to me one day on the South Lawn. We were out there. They were flying off someplace, and the helicopter was out on the South Lawn. And there's a photo of this, a part of this in the book. And we, members of the East Wing staff, had gone out to bid them goodbye. And at one point, the president, as he was and Mrs. Nixon were going to the helicopter, pointed at me and pointed kind of down. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I thought, I'm not going to. I had learned by then better manners than or better behavior than to ask, hey, buddy, what do you mean? And so they went on, and I turned around with everybody else to walk back in the White House, and I fell flat on my face. The president was telling me that my shoelaces were untied. That must have been what he was doing. But they were very nice. The Fords were exceptional. Really, even more exceptionally nice. I talk a lot about the Fords and about some very interesting experiences that I had, particularly with President Ford. One of them was a conversation I had when they threw a picnic for the staff. I guess it was probably in September of '74. Nixon resigned left on August 9th. And they threw a picnic for everybody. And at one point, I ran into the president, and he asked me what I did, and I told him. And he goes, "So how do you like being a messenger?" And I said, "Fine. How do you like being president?" He goes, "That's a pretty good job. Not too bad." And then we went, our natural ways. He went off to run the business of the greatest nation on earth, and I went back to the picnic to look for potato salad. So
right. Now, I have a question for you. I don't mean to take the conversation on a giant sort of detour, but the term deep throat, was brought into the, I guess, common vernacular, and you were an adolescent boy and you saw all this going on. I'm just curious, you being 18.
I know where this is going.
I want to know, was your mind in the gutter? Did you know what that was at the time? Was it really that big of a movie? And, I guess...
I'm sorry.
I mean, we've come a long way where, a major adult film name was like the code word for the informant back then. And now our president is involved in an adult film stars scandal or whatever. I mean, that's sort of where we've come to. But I'm just curious what it was like for you with that sort of term bandied about.
Everybody knew about that movie.
Right.
Gotcha.
Everybody did. In fact, there's some interesting stories about it, that the more celebrities that went to go see it, the bigger it got, until it became, I guess, just such a huge cash machine. There was some story about the mob having some involvement with that movie, and that they got to the point where they were literally just weighing the money. They couldn't even count it. So everybody knew about that.
I want to take another twist, Don, because you've had an amazing career, obviously. Who gets to meet and chit-chat with presidents and prime ministers, everything. But you had, I guess, I don't know if it's your second career or career after, but after all this in your adult life, I guess after the breakup of the Soviet Union, you went to, I guess, Eastern Europe or Russia to help with the free press. And I think that's fascinating. Maybe just give us a little bit of a background on that, because I have so many questions on that.
Well, there had been a program that the Bush 41 administration had set up to send media executives to the former states of the former Soviet Union to help them try to build a free and independent press. And after the wall had come down, I first went there in 1994. And so the wall had been down for several years, and there was a quasi-free press. But it was still being, all of the presses were owned by the government, so all of the government did all of the printing. They decided how many pages each newspaper got and those kinds of things. There were still a lot of people that were very afraid, particularly in Russia, and I spent time in Siberia, who were very afraid to ruffle feathers. Basically what had happened, and I don't want to take this far afield, but basically what had happened is that people particularly in Russia, had simply changed their title from whatever they were in the Communist Party now to the Russian Federation. There was really no change in anything. It was the same people doing the same kinds of things. And they were, when given the chance to be able to speak openly, a lot didn't take it. I remember being shocked. I grew up during I was a little boy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I lived, during most of all of the Cold War. I was shocked when a guide that we had who took us to the Kremlin made the comment. She was probably about 20, and made the comment that she thought Yeltsin was a fool. And you would have never heard that before. I had a friend, as the stories in the book, who, well, we sort of got friendly. He had been with the Soviet embassy, and he just suddenly disappeared one day. I ended up with some other friends when I went to Russia, who were in the, one guy in particular who had been in the KGB, and actually had been in the Russian embassy in Tehran when our hostages were taken. It wasn't, well, I have to say that it was difficult to build the kind of free press that we and Europeans are used to, in particular because of the lack of an economy. How these people got through things, I have no idea. I only can give them an enormous amount of credit. Everything was squashed, including their will to live in a lot of cases. One of the interesting things that happened was that we would have conversations. You've heard about, newspapers that have been sold at kiosks or out of racks. Not any more today, but that was a huge element of newspaper distribution around the world. And we ended up in a meeting in which money was being discussed. I mean, not like we were going to buy anything, or it just had to do with what they were charging for the paper and that kind of thing. All of a sudden, a guy comes in the worst-looking Italian knockoff suit you ever saw. Dopey-looking guy comes and sits in the back and leans forward so you can see the butt of his revolver hanging out. The mob was all over the place. They were in front of every restaurant. They were in many of the conversations that we had. They just kind of show up, and everybody was scared of them for obvious reasons. But these folks really did everything that they were very courageous. We bought a press for one lady who became a regional printer, and that lasted for a while until the Yeltsin regime came to an end, and then Putin clamped down on everything. But it was very interesting. I mean, and then I had a whole series of very odd, because I am Forrest Gump, a lot of very odd circumstances, including we spent a night in a sane asylum in Siberia one night that was guarded by sheep herders.
Wow.
So I relate a lot of those
Sounds
stories
like
in the
a
book
fun
that I'm
night.
actually working on now.
Well, Don, I can't thank you enough. Everyone, here's the book again, downstairs at the White House. I bought it on Amazon. You could buy it anywhere. It's a quick read. It's a great read. Don, thank you very, very much for taking your time. And you're a true front row seat of history. It's amazing the experiences you've had.
Well, and I've had others, and I'm gonna be right. 9/11 and the first bombing of the World Trade Center and a number of other things. I don't know why it happens, but it just seems to happen.
Well, we'll definitely have you back. I thank you very much. I feel bad we're out of time. There's so many stories I wanted to get to, but that's the way it goes sometimes.
Thank
Don.
you
again. Everyone, thank you. We'll see you next week. Todd, I will see you next week, my friend.
Yes,
everyone, Jack. I want you to go out there, hug your family, hug your loved ones, and hug your friends. Give everyone a big hug from us.
Have a great
Thank
week.
you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
When the earth was created, the